Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your hosts Sam Foote.
And Anne Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Office 365 focused IT security professionals. Each episode, we talk about a specific topic in the space. This week, it's episode 10 of season 3. We're going to have a chat around solutions in Power Platform, a mechanism to manage your low code / no code applications life cycles. Hey Al, how are you doing this week?
Hey Sam, not doing too bad. Been busy.
Yeah, it has been busy, and we are halfway through this season of the podcast. Seems a bit surreal. I'm going to use that word, I think, because yeah, it's flying past at the moment, isn't it? Don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm just thinking, season 1 we only did 9 episodes, and we said this last season that we were already like surpassing it, and now we're in this third season and we're already past it already. It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because are we on for about a June sort of time, end of season? I think that's when it's planned up to, something like that.
It's something like that, or it's I think end of May, beginning of June, somewhere like that.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, flying through, but yeah, one episode a week, yeah, gets us moving for sure. So, okay, solutions in Power Platform then, Alan. Just to give everybody a brief sort of a background, Alan does I'm going to say a lot of work in Power Platform. I'm going to call it that. So this is definitely a great topic for him to cover. He's definitely a subject matter expert in all things Power Platform. So yeah, I'm going to try and sort of prize as much knowledge as I can out of Alan, and yeah, we'll see what nuggets of information that we can get out of him because yeah, the management of any sort of let's call it bespoke platform can be complex, and I think there's some great tooling in Power Platform to help you do that. So yeah, if you're building um, Power Platform applications, maybe storing data inside a Power Platform, hopefully this is going to give you some real good insight about maybe making that a bit more, I'll call it production ready and management of it. So yeah, let's jump right in then. So Alan, what are solutions in Power Platform? Can you just give us an overview?
Yeah, sure. So solutions in Power Platform are kind of, I guess, like containers. So it gives you the ability to store if you're working on some automation or you've got a Power App, and you've got loads of different components, and you want to be able to manage them in one place, because I guess if you think about when you create flows and things like that, they're assigned to you as a person, and then you have to share them. So it's quite hard to sort of collaborate in some form. One person's got to create it, and then you've then got to share it with the other people in the team, sort of thing. Where this is kind of all in one place, and multiple people can edit a solution at the same time, sort of thing. So it's Microsoft have sort of put it in as a application lifecycle management, so it gives you the ability to manage different parts of that process, from going from development to production ready kind of thing. So been using it quite a lot recently.
So what you're saying is it's effectively a way to bundle a bunch of different resources into one sort of. I think you use the word container, a package in effect, right?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if we talked about Azure, it'd probably be something like a resource group, I guess, but not quite. But kind of put them all into one place so you can manage it. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Like you say, that logic. I'll call it like logical grouping of resources. Without having lots of scattered items here, there, and everywhere is a really powerful thing. So is do solutions just come in like one flavor? Are there different types of solutions that you can have?
Yeah. So when there's two types of solutions. Well, yeah, there's two types of solutions: managed and unmanaged. And whenever you create a new solution that is unmanaged, and this is kind of your development sort of area, or your development solution. So you'll put in all of your application together and things like that within that. And then a managed solution is when you sort of export it into production. And basically, when it moves into that sort of mode, um, it becomes sort of read only from a configuration perspective. So if you've got things like tables and things like that in there, you can't like change the schema or anything like that. It's set in stone, but you can populate data into those tables, things like that. That's absolutely fine. It's more around the configuration piece. So it's kind of this is now sealed. This is version 1.1, whatever it might be, and this is it. This is how it runs. So there's less issues around someone maybe tweaking it or editing and accidentally deleting something, because like I was saying before, flows, power apps are all like individually assigned, and if multiple people are in a project, then the owners might be different, and you only have to go into a flow or a power app and delete something and save it, and that's sort of gone. There's no versioning or anything like that for it. um so yeah, that's the two sort of main areas.
Okay, yeah. So a managed solution sounds like to me kind of like compiling your code, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
you've got like if we were to ever do a release, it's quite interesting actually, because back in the day with ASP.NET, you can just throw your well, you can still do it now. You could throw your source code up onto your web server, right? And anybody could theoretically, well, not anybody, but anybody with access could edit that folder and edit that source code like live, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Um, but like the proper way to deploy it is to publish a version. Effectively, you build a bunch of DLLs which have got your code in it. It's then uneditable, right? And I don't really think it's done now, but back in the day, people used to love being able to edit like live on production, if that makes sense, because it was easy. You didn't have to go through any sort of change process or anything like that, right? And we probably understand why that's not a good idea. But I kind of see this. This is what managed solutions is giving you. It's giving you the ability to say this is version like you said, like 1.1, 1.2, and unless we explicitly produce a new version of that solution, and then I assume you can then upgrade it, if that makes sense. Can you like promote a new version? I suppose maybe we'll get into that later. um but but you're putting a line in the sand, especially in production, saying you know you can use it, but you can't change fundamentally how it functions or works, which is really powerful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's one of the things I've had in the past before I knew about solutions in my early days of citizen developing. I mean, I'm probably not a citizen developer anymore in this area, but
What are you then,
um,
Alan? What
I
do you classify
well,
yourself as? What do you identify as? What are you?
yeah, yeah, exactly. I don't know. There's too many hats, to be honest. But
We'll have to come up for a new name for you. But I do agree. Generally, I do agree. You're a little bit more advanced than that for sure. Okay, so yeah, so can you give us some examples of how sort of solutions can be used, in the wild?
yeah, so we kind of talked about it a little bit. So, internal applications, if you're building something that is going to be in production, not just for like yourself, multiple people working on it, then, it could be an internal application. And you want to go through different, you want to, manage that life cycle, because within your Microsoft tenant, you can have multiple environments. So you can create a sandbox environment and then your production environment within Power Platform. Um, it kind of ties into like Dynamics, things like that as well, because obviously Dynamics 365 sits on top of the Dataverse, the Power Platform kind of stuff. So, um, but yeah, so you can build your dev application in your dev environment, and then you can move it to staging and production. And one thing to probably mention here is that actually you can do that process um, with the I think it's the Power Platform or Power Apps or Solutions CLI. I think there's, I can't remember what we call it, but basically you can use that in DevOps to export the code. It in effect pulls it out of the container it creates, and then you can upload it to you can go look at DevOps to look at the code, code changes, things like that. And that's been quite useful because it does break it down quite well to see what's changed. And the same thing is with the pipelines and things like that. You can then push it to staging and production, and then you've got that sort of change process as well, which I think is really good. Um, and then the other kind of way you could use it is if you want to, sell a Power App or a Power Platform solution, because you're creating you're managing the creation of it, the updates, things like that, and then you know make it managed, and then you can pass it to the customer to then install. And they don't, they can't modify the code or anything like that, and make changes and break it. And then you can just like release updates to them. So that's another way that you could potentially use it, which I think is quite a good idea as well.
Yeah, I think it gives because it is low code and no code, right? It's sort of in its DNA to be able to be the solution, what you build on it to be portable, right?
Hmm.
Because you're not, well, you maybe are embedding code in there, but you're not. Your primary focus isn't to write code to build your application interfaces and your business logic and all of those things, right? You're configuring the platform to do that, right? So it kind of makes sense that it should be able to export your configuration of the platform and then be able to re-import it in different environments, you know, and because that environment is completely managed, you know, let's say I'm an application developer, right, and I build an application that could be run like inside of somebody else's environment, you know. Um, there's ways to do that in Azure and manage an environment on somebody else's behalf and all of those things. But what's great about this is that this is built on top of a completely it's a SaaS environment at this point, isn't it? Right? It's not even a
Yeah,
like is it SaaS? Yeah, it is SaaS, right? It's
yeah,
not
it
even
says.
it's not PaaS, is it? So 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 but if let's say I don't know I've made some app, you know, Rubik's cube solver app or something like that, and I'm giving it to you, bad example, and I want to sell it to you, right? The only prerequisite that you have to have is the licensing, to be able to run it on the other side, because to get a fault tolerant app up and running in Azure, that could be quite expensive, and it could require a lot of technical knowledge to even run the infrastructure to do that. Whereas I can effectively say to you, Alan, pay me some money and I'll send you the solution file to install, right? And I assume it's just as simple as that in some sense, right? And you could just start, utilizing it.
Yeah,
Do
absolutely.
people buy and sell solutions like that? Is there a marketplace for solutions? How does that, or is this,
Yeah,
or
I
is it?
think I think there is. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a specific place you go to. I don't know if there might be some things on the Microsoft Marketplace or the Azure Marketplace kind of thing. There might be something like that around um, to do that. But I've definitely seen some partners, things like that, sort of suggesting to they're built, when they're Power Platform experts or Dynamics experts at least, because it's kind of the same sort of form.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah,
Because they build, in effect, it's building solutions where potentially, if you had Dynamics, this is building solutions for Dynamics as well.
yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it's all sort of the same thing, but not as complex, or the the logic and everything within Dynamics is insane, I think. But
Well, let's say somebody contracted me to go in and like build out some tables in maybe some data schema in Dataverse, right, to model out some data or something like that. I could do it in my environment, couldn't I? Solutionize it and then deliver it to them as a solution, right?
yeah,
So are solutions completely isolated between each other, or do like whatever resources inside a solution can then other solutions access those resources?
Yes, so they can't. Yeah, so they're not completely isolated, but they, from a permissioning perspective, they can be. If
Right.
that makes
Okay.
sense. So
Yeah.
if for example, if you created a table, or if the example is that if we use the account table, if you had Dynamics, um, in the Dynamics app installed, you may have all of the account information. So this is in effect a customer at this rate. So the company name, things like that, and maybe you want to add a couple of extra columns to it, entity fields, so that you can store some extra data for this solution only. What you can do is you can say, I want to access that account, but I'm not managing any of the other fields. I just want to add two to it. And then
Right.
you can
Okay.
say that if you've got permission to that solution, then you're able to modify or edit those fields, kind of thing. So and you can create dependencies on other solutions as well, because you might require the other solution, the other tables and stuff as well. So
Okay.
you can
Yeah.
make it a little bit complex if you really want to, but again, you might have small teams doing small bits of solutions that then all tie up to one big product or automation kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Because like, if I just go back to my programming days, you would have like multiple modules or packages of like business logic that would might be brought together inside of another application to have a you know like and you would have those things like dependencies on each other. You would reference each module with each other, because you might have like a core business logic module which had all of your you know well yeah your like unit tested business logic that you wanted to share amongst other modules,
Mhm.
if that makes sense. And maybe you had another team that worked on that side of things. So it kind of sounds like the same thing, where solutions can be applied and they can be isolated if you want them to. Certain things can have visibilities, but they can build on top of each other and reference each other in order to so they're not isolated containers of logic and resources, but they can be more collaborative than fully isolated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess you could maybe have a solution, or part of the solution. There's a team that looks after the data model, like you said, but make
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
that's all okay, and maybe some logic about making sure it's tidy, or doing retention, or stuff like that. There's stuff that might not be built in, um, or even like connectors to other data sources outside of. It might be flows pulling data in, that sort of stuff, and then maybe there's the UI part that's on top that maybe isn't in the same solution.
yeah. You might have some sort of like governance like model in place, right, where somebody, some sort of team is responsible for the data, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's team A's responsibility to make sure that the security of that data and the retention life cycle of that data is one thing, and then you might have other people in the business which are building like applications and interfaces and business logic on top of that potential data, right? And so yeah, it does make sense that could happen in the real world.
Yeah, and you might not want other teams to be able to have the ability to, if you're working on the same project, you might not want them to be able to modify that, because of if it's unmanaged, and anyone that has access can then modify it. So by separating it out, you might be able to say it has to go to this staging environment as it is, and then you do your testing against that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay, so what can be added into a solution then?
So there's lots of things. I'm not going to grab them all. I had another quick look at the list just before we did this. Us recording this podcast, but the obvious things around power apps. So that is model driven ones, and the Canvas apps. Um, the automation, so cloud flows, um, desktop flows, things like that. So that all kind of makes sense. Um, Data first tables. So like I said, you can create your own. You create the new tables in there, or potentially modify current tables that are available within the Dataverse. Some of the other things are like choices, but that kind of comes into the Dataverse where you got choices on what on some of the fields. Chatbots. So I'm guessing this is probably around virtual agents, things like that as well. So it's quite good to keep those in there. You've got reporting and dashboards. So within the Dataverse stuff, you can build dashboards, things like that around the data. It does include Power BI as well, which is quite interesting. So you can have your Power BI dashboard with it. I think that might be preview the last time I looked at it. I have to double check. But yeah, that'd be great if you could bring in like your Power BI report in so that you can distribute that managed as well. And like I said, there's various other things in there. One key thing is the security roles. So within the Dataverse tables, you can do you can specify different roles for each table, things like that, and create those roles automatically. So when it gets pushed into the next environment, you can then the roles are already there, and all you got to do is then populate them with users or teams and things like that. So that's really, really handy because I've been in situations before I knew you could do that, where you had to create them in each environment, which isn't great. So, yeah, there's loads in there. I think there's also some components that you can build because I can't quite remember what they are, but it's like, is it Java? It's not JavaScript. It's React. Is it some React components you can create, Sam?
Like PCL components.
Yeah, can you remember you can add some stuff in, can't you, to make it a bit more extra things that you can add to a Power App, isn't there?
Yeah, you can add like custom components
Controls,
in.
yeah,
Yeah.
controls and
Controls,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, so they can go in there as well. So again, you can protect your IP, I guess, at that point if you're building custom stuff for people, if you're selling it. But yeah, there is tons in there.
So basically anything that any sort of resource that you would have as part of your application build can go into a solution, right? Is there anything that's not available in a solution that you can think of?
Not off the top of my head from what you would build into a Power App or Power Platform solution. No, it's even got like things like the connectors for the flows or for the Power Apps. It won't necessarily create the actual authorize the connections themselves because it depends on what environment. If you're giving it to a customer, it won't be able to authorize back to you. But the actual requirement for that type of connector is there, so that when it gets imported, you can then, in effect, they can authorize it against the resource it's trying to access.
Okay, great. So what's what parts? So what's parts of the life cycle of a solution are actually available to you? With solutions.
Okay, so you've got the first one, which is create. So that is you creating this solution, or potentially this could be you exporting this as an unmanaged solution, so you can move it to another environment. Maybe you are giving the customer the ability to make changes. Maybe you're just handing it over. So that's the create part. So that's authoring the solution. You have update. So this is updates to the managed solution itself. So when you do a change to the unmanaged one, you can, in effect, export an update for it. And these are kind of, adding components to the solution. But this doesn't allow you to delete anything within it. So you can't like remove a table or a form, or you've changed the Power App or something like that. This is just doing updates to maybe you've added a table or a field. So that's doing that. You've got upgrade. So this is merging multiple updates into one and then being able to then import it. And this does allow you to do, because it's doing, as it kind of sounds, it's an upgrade. This could be deleting different components. So this is like a bigger, well, as it kind of says, it's a cumulative update of all the changes. And then you've got patch. So this is sort of really small updates. This is more like hot fixes. There's a little bit of a bug in in the flow or the in some of the logic that you've got there, and then you're just making a small change to it. So it's just like a quick patch to it. And again, um, this can't delete components. So yeah, it's fairly simple. There's no sort of full delete. Well, of course you've got the other lifecycle application. You've got the delete of it, I guess, but that's kind of just removed from the environment. Um, one good thing about talking about that from removing from an environment, um, it doesn't leave anything behind because you're removing that solution. Everything that is attached to it then gets removed quite safely. There's no like bits staying within that environment, which is really good.
So I do have one question, um, and that is around the upgrade like path of applications, right? Because one of the really challenging things I've had over the years is like migrating data schemas and things like that. That's where it starts to get a bit complicated. Like, let's say I'll give you an example. You add a column to a table
Hmm.
that then needs to be populated with a default value, let's say, right? Um, so when you do an update, is there any way to have any sort of like logic as part of that update to clean up any of those things, or would you deploy an update and then maybe a flow goes with it to go and do any of your like custom like logic
Uh,
work, if that makes sense, right?
so when you do an upgrade, yes, it just adds the table. It doesn't remove any data. That's one thing to probably notice, that even though you're making changes to the table storage, the dataverse, none of the data that's currently there is like nuked or anything like that. Because there's kind of always a worry, isn't it, that it's like replacing it and all of a sudden you've got no data, kind of thing. I know within application development, that's generally not the case when you do schema updates, but
But
it
but
kind of
if
feels
you
like a big package, isn't it?
yeah, but if you removed a column from a table that you like controlled, would it delete that column from their, when you updated their solution in their environment, would it remove that column?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you could have a destructive action with an update if that makes sense. It's
with
not going to
with
lock
with
you in.
the upgrade one, yes, not with
Yeah.
an
Okay.
update, but with an upgrade, yeah, it can remove components of within the solution, yeah. Um, to do with the default value, um, I'd have to double check because fields can have a default. Some of them can have a default value in them, so it would be yeah, it's true. I haven't actually tested that whether if you've got a default value for it, whether it would populate it automatically or not. Um, but yeah, potentially you could have a flow that is like the upgrade, tidy up kind of thing, maybe just to update the data kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I just that's the only ever time that I've ever like struggled with, in like programming world. That's the only other time that I've ever really struggled with like upgrades or new releases, right? Where you maybe you've got a new schema that you've deployed, and let's say your app doesn't work without your new schema changes and your business logic changes, right? So you have to like patch your database, run your database upgrade scripts, and then apply your application on top, and have all of that downtime, well, no, potential downtime in between. It's all scripted and everything, so it's all tested ahead of time. Um, but when it's your response, if when you're responsible for a data schema and you've got to make changes to that data schema, that's when it can start to become really challenging. And I just because from what I know of Dataverse, the the um the the data the functionality of the data schema in Dataverse is really powerful, right? You can have relationships, you can have lookups, you can have effectively enums, choices, but in different things. But then my brain then whirs and goes, well, if you can add on change all these things, like how does it reconcile between two like changes, right? You know, if Alan removes like four columns from a data table and then adds six more, how does it all like work all of that out, if that makes sense. Um but then on the other flip side of it is those schemas generally tend to upgrade or update very little once they're in, or they're, small changes going
Yeah.
forward. And I do think that if you were building like, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but if you were building a large scale application, this might not be a system that you actually use for that, if that makes sense, because you may want more flexibility and control. So it might be because of these are like line of business internalish sort of
Yeah.
apps and things like that, that those scenarios might not come up quite so much, right? You know,
Y- Yeah, I mean, the same thing could happen for you know, Power Apps, Power Platform, automation, etc. can all talk to external data sources. So it could be a SQL where the data is stored. So you'll have to go through that process of running those upgrade scripts for the schema and stuff like that there before you deploy the solution, because the SQL won't be in the solution.
yeah.
So you have got the other components as well. If you're talking outside and there's changes you need to do.
If you've got a solution, right, that let's say you've got a column in a table that is referenced by a Power App, for instance, or a view in Dataverse. If you remove that from the table, is there like validation that then says, you have to go and fix all these other things before you can export it or save it, or before you publish and things like that? There's those sorts of controls there for you.
Yes.
So you can't
Yes,
get
there
you
there
can't
is
get into an
dependency.
invalidity.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you could, yeah, it'll tell you, well, yeah, it'll tell if you try to delete if you're using the Dataverse and you try to remove a column, it will say this is referenced somewhere. Or
right.
if you try and delete the table, we'll go, oh, it's in the Power App. You need to remove it from here, and this thing is being referenced. So there is some that sort of stuff there. So
And maybe all
um,
of that protection protects you from getting into those scenarios, right? Because you're not allowed to, make something unreferenced and make something invalid, right?
yeah, I mean, the only thing to think about is that if you've got applications outside, like you're using logic apps to talk to the Dataverse, if you change schema tables, then and you update the app, then that logic app isn't going to update with it. You're going to have to push the changes in there as well. So it's just being cautious of that. If you're using the REST API for Dataverse, then
Yep.
changes will be in the other environments, but you're going to have to change the external sources, I guess.
Yeah, and that's exactly the same as if you've got some sort of restful integration or API, integration between two systems. There's always that challenge of like, making sure that whatever's consuming that API is actually updated, because they can be intrinsically linked at that point, right? And this is when it comes back to the whole, you know, should you have microservices or a mono repo? When you've got to update everything at the same time, it might as well just all be in the same place, basically, because it effectively is one, solution. So, um, no, it's really interesting, but it does sound like there's some really good, um, sounds like there's some really good controls to help you with that life cycle, right? That's what I'm getting from this is that you've got the tooling around you to help you with those deployments, which is really powerful.
Yeah, I was just thinking that when you create a solution, there is some user or there is some configuration stuff you can do. I just remembered that I've seen it on there. I'd have to double check, but maybe that is something you can do as well. Maybe there is a way to do that, like script upgrade script, maybe as part of it. Um, but I'd have to double check because I just remember seeing it, but we don't use it.
Okay.
Maybe we should be.
I don't know.
But
No, no. Well, if you've never
yeah,
if you've never had that challenge, and it's it only ever really happens when there's big schema changes, right? Like where you have to might need to do some data migration in between your schema updates. Um, just be really interesting to see how somebody would handle that process. To me, it might be just like a logic app that runs once on. It knows when it's been updated and it applies some data migrations. So it could be something like that.
yeah,
Okay, so solutions obviously seem to be quite a powerful part of Where is it technically? Is it Power Apps or is it Dataverse? It's Power Platform. It's
It's that the solutions are in the Power Apps website or Power Apps Blade. That's where you create them. You can still create flows and things like that from there. That's how you get to them.
okay.
Um,
Okay, so
but
is
yeah,
there any extra licensing on top of it for solutions?
so as far as I'm aware, um, if you're paying for Power Apps or Power Automate, full per user licensing or per app licensing, things like that. It's included in that. And I believe even with the Office 365 sort of licensing that you can use them. I'd have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure I can remember seeing them in there because it's just tying them all together. It just might be that you can't use a Dataverse with a Office 365 license. So it might just be that you're doing Power Apps, Canvas apps, and Power Automation um, within it, which would still be good for the Office 365 automation or views, things like that, to solutionize. Um, but Dataverse does definitely just bring another angle or an angle to building within that environment.
Okay, no, that's great. I haven't got any more other questions to be totally honest with you to ask you, Alan. Is there
Just
anything else that we've missed or you want to cover off on it?
there's probably a lot more to power to the solutions themselves. Like I said, there's loads of configuration in there. Um, I think there is like a user configuration where you can have like a user, like a page where you go to and you can configure the app as well, things like that. But no, I think that's pretty much it. I think we chose a topic that is quite niche, get us to the point. We're not rushing it, sort of thing. Because we've hit a couple of those, haven't we? Where we've ran through it quite quickly. So um,
Oh yeah, well, power apps you can't just talk about in 35 minutes for sure. So yeah, no, I think it's good to because if people people might be exploring power apps right inside their organization and they might be thinking, how can I move this into production? Like I've made my tech demo, I've shown it to people internally, they're really bought into it, we're all ready to go and everything, but maybe turning it into something real at that point is the next step, isn't it? And there's lots of you know uh nuances and information there that is good to cover. So no, definitely it's
yeah,
been a really good session.
and it's really good that you can actually put it through a repository solution, DevOps, GitHub, etc., to store the code, do versioning and everything on it as well, and see that the code in effect your entity changes or your flow changes, etc. So and potentially being able to then distribute via the Git actions or the DevOps pipelines. I think that's really good. I think that's been quite useful for us to see the actual changes we're making.
Yeah, being able to get them into a format where you can actually look at the diff between the two and
Yes.
and see because you do just have an interface, there's no real like source control, is there? Right, you can go in and edit in the interface and you can save and and then at least if you export it out before you go into production you can actually see, and it is pretty readable, like what actual changes have been made from the output of that, right? you know
Yeah, definitely. It breaks it down into the power apps themselves, or the the entities themselves, or the tables, and then tells you the schema for them and what you've changed and things like that. So it is really good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, it's really good. Okay, well, let's leave it there on this one. What are we talking about next, Alan?
You are going to talk about Azure Cognitive Services, and I'm guessing we're going to have a hint of Chat GPT in there.
I
I
did
expect.
see, yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. I'm going to do an overview of cognitive services. Lots of black boxes over there with some magic sprinkled in. So yeah, I'm going to do an overview of each of the workloads and what's possible in cognitive services because it is a bit of magic over there. And I do every time I go back and look at cognitive services, they've added even more, and then I go, wow, this is amazing. So we're going to go through Azure Cognitive Services, and if you don't know what cognitive services is, it's a group of tooling to do different sort of cognitive workloads. Like there's lots of machine vision. Um, Natural language processing, bots, all various manner of different sort of cognitive services that are underneath that banner. So yeah, it's an exciting place to be, and as Alan mentioned, it's a hot topic. Lots of people talking about it. So yeah, it should be quite a good episode to go through and to understand. There's quite a few products in there as well, so we'll do a little dive on each one, and then hopefully later on we'll actually have dedicated episodes on each one, if appropriate. Okay. Cool. So yeah, if you've enjoyed this episode, please do consider subscribing if you'd like to listen to more of this content in the future. We have many different topics that we like to cover, and your listens and support is what will continue to fuel the podcast going forward.
We also have the ability for you to give us some feedback. Did you enjoy this episode? Disagree with our thoughts? Did I miss something that was important? Click on the link in our show notes. It will take you to a contact form, and we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, thanks very much, Alan, and we'll speak to you next week, everyone. Cheers.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Speak soon. Bye.